Be silent for a moment. Let the noise of the world disappear. Because the first thing God says is not through words. It is through silence. God does not shout at you from the sky. God whispers from within. And that whisper says only one thing: focus on yourself. You are constantly trying to fix the world, change people, fight situations, chase approval. But God is not interested in the world you are trying to decorate. God is interested in the consciousness through which you see the world. When God says change everything, He does not mean your job, your city, or your relationships. He means change the center from which you live. The moment you focus on yourself, not selfishly, but awakened, your thoughts transform, your habits dissolve, your fears lose power, and your life begins to rearrange itself naturally. You don't need to become someone else. You only need to remember who you already are. God says focus on yourself, not because you are broken, not because you are weak, but because you have forgotten where your power lies. You have been taught to look outward from the very beginning. You were told to look at success, look at others, look at heaven, look at rules, look at approval. Slowly, silently, your eyes turned away from the only place where truth exists. God is not found in directions, scriptures, or crowds. God is found in awareness. And awareness begins only when attention returns to the self. Not the ego self that wants to be special, but the silent witness that simply is. When God says, focus on yourself, it is not advice, it is a command of existence itself, because existence can only be experienced from within. You cannot borrow consciousness. You cannot imitate awakening. You can copy words, gestures, beliefs, but transformation does not happen through imitation. It happens when you see yourself as you are, without judgment, without excuses, without decoration. The mind resists this instruction deeply. The mind prefers distraction. It prefers noise, comparison, ambition, guilt, and hope. The mind survives by keeping you busy everywhere except here. Because the moment you focus on yourself, the false layers begin to fall. You start seeing patterns that were hidden under activity. You notice how thoughts repeat themselves like old recordings. You notice how reactions are automatic, not chosen. You notice how fear disguises itself as logic. This noticing is dangerous for the mind because it exposes its mechanical nature. God is not asking you to fight the mind. Fighting only strengthens it. God is asking you to watch it. Watching is enough. In watching, change begins without effort. In watching, you stop being the slave and become the master, not by control but by clarity. To focus on yourself does not mean self-obsession. Self-obsession is unconscious. It is full of stories, wounds, pride, and shame. Focus is conscious. Focus is light. When light enters a dark room, darkness does not fight. Darkness disappears. In the same way, when awareness enters your inner world, confusion slowly dissolves. You start seeing how you live borrowed lives, how your desires are second hand, how your fears are inherited, how your goals were planted by others. This realization is painful at first because the ego feels threatened. The ego wants to believe it is unique, chosen, right. Awareness does not care about being right. Awareness only cares about being real. God is reality, not comfort. When God says change your everything, it does not mean improvement. Improvement is horizontal movement. You become a better version of the same prison. You decorate the cage. You polish the chains. Change, real change, is vertical. It is a shift in dimension. It is not about becoming more. It is about becoming empty. Empty of false identities. Empty of borrowed beliefs, empty of unnecessary suffering. Only emptiness can receive truth. A cup already full cannot receive water. You have filled yourself with opinions, labels, memories, and expectations. God asks you to empty yourself, not as loss but as freedom. The world tells you to become somebody. God tells you to become nobody. Somebody is always in conflict, always defending, always afraid of losing position. Nobody is relaxed, open, playful. From nobodyhood, authenticity arises. When you focus on yourself deeply, you start noticing moments of silence between thoughts. At first they are small, fragile, easy to miss. But those gaps are doors. In those gaps, there is no past, no future, no anxiety, no ambition. There is only presence. That presence is what religions have called God, but words have corrupted it. Presence does not belong to any belief system. Presence is available to anyone who dares to be still. You have been trained to believe that change comes through effort, struggle, discipline, and punishment. That is the language of society, not the language of existence. Existence changes you through understanding. The moment you understand something totally, you cannot remain the same. When you see clearly that anger is poisoning you, anger loses its grip. When you see clearly that comparison is creating misery, comparison drops. No moral effort is needed. God does not want you to be good. God wants you to be aware. Goodness is a byproduct. Compassion is a fragrance. Peace is a shadow that follows awareness. Focusing on yourself means taking responsibility, not blame. Blame is violent. Responsibility is empowering. When you blame yourself, you are still divided. When you take responsibility, you become whole. You stop saying, life did this to me, people did this to me, fate did this to me. You start seeing how you participated unconsciously. This seeing is not condemnation, it is liberation. Because the moment you see your participation, you regain choice. Unconsciousness has no choice. Consciousness is choice. God is not interested in your success or failure. God is interested in your awakening. Success and failure are games of the mind. Awakening is a flowering of being. When you focus on yourself, layers of conditioning begin to loosen. You no longer react immediately. There is a pause. In that pause, freedom exists. Slowly, your relationships change. Not because you try to change them, but because you are no longer the same center. Your work changes not because you plan it, but because your energy changes. Your suffering changes not because problems disappear, but because you are no longer identified with them. The greatest misunderstanding is that focusing on yourself is selfish. In truth, unconscious people are selfish. Conscious people are generous without trying. When you are full of awareness, you overflow. You do not need to prove love, kindness, or honesty. They express themselves naturally. God is not asking you to follow rules. God is asking you to remember your nature. A rose does not try to smell good. It simply blooms. When you focus on yourself, you bloom. And in that blooming, your entire life rearranges itself, not according to society's expectations, not according to fear, but according to an inner harmony that has always been waiting for your attention silently, patiently, without demand, without promise, without threat, just waiting for you to turn inward and see that everything you were searching for outside was never lost, only overlooked. Because you were looking everywhere except where God has always been speaking, from the very center of your being, in a language that has no words, no commandments, no conclusions, only awareness unfolding into awareness, moment by moment, breath by breath, thought by thought, until the seeker dissolves into seeing, and seeing dissolves into being, and being remains without name, without direction, without finality. When God says, change your everything, do not misunderstand it as a command to rearrange your furniture, change your job, alter your relationships, or seek new experiences in the external world. Those are trivialities. The real change begins at the very core of your being, at the center from which all perception, thought, and emotion emerge. Every action, every habit, every reaction you have is a reflection of unconscious patterns that you have accumulated since your earliest moments. You have been programmed by family, by society, by culture, by history to behave in certain ways, to think certain thoughts, to feel certain emotions. These programs have become so deeply rooted that you have forgotten there is a witness inside you, a consciousness that is untouched by the world yet intimately connected with it. Change everything, God says, not externally but internally. The world will never transform until the observer within you transforms. The observer is everything. It is the lens through which you see life, the soil from which your actions grow, the light in which your entire existence is reflected. To change everything, you must first become willing to look at yourself with brutal honesty. This is not easy, for the mind will resist. The mind has survived by keeping you distracted, by keeping you busy, by giving you constant tasks, worries, and ambition. It thrives when your attention is outward, because the moment it turns inward, the layers of conditioning start to crumble. And when they crumble, the mind feels vulnerable. It fears exposure. But God does not ask you to fight the mind, to discipline it, or to control it. God asks you only to observe it, to watch the dance of thoughts, the rise of emotions, the impulses of desires, without interference. Observation is not judgment. Observation is not evaluation. Observation is pure awareness. And in that awareness, transformation occurs naturally, effortlessly, inevitably. Change does not mean becoming a better version of the same person. Improvement is horizontal movement. It polishes the old self, decorates the same cage, hides the same chains. Real change is vertical. It is a shift in dimension, a leap into a new depth of consciousness. It is not about becoming more. It is about becoming empty of borrowed beliefs, empty of false identities, empty of illusions, empty of fear, empty of attachment. Only when you are empty can you receive truth, because a cup that is already full cannot take in water. You have filled yourself with opinions, comparisons, judgments, expectations, and regrets. God asks you to empty yourself, not as a punishment, not as self-denial, but as liberation. Emptiness is not void. It is space for life to enter, for consciousness to expand, for love, clarity, joy, and peace to flow naturally without effort. The first step in this journey is awareness of your habitual reactions. How often do you act automatically without noticing? How often do you repeat old patterns simply because they are comfortable or familiar? Observe your anger, your fears, your desires, your attachments. See them not as enemies, not as faults, not as problems to be fixed, but as phenomena arising within you. When you see clearly, they begin to dissolve on their own. There is no need to fight them. Fighting only strengthens the ego. Awareness is gentle yet radical. It dissolves the force effortlessly, like sunlight melting frost. Each time you notice an old habit without judgment, you weaken its grip. Each time you witness a fear without running from it, you claim a bit more freedom. Each time you observe your thoughts without becoming them, you open a door into the infinite. To change everything, you must also see how deeply intertwined you are with the world. Everything you call yours, your possessions, your roles, your reputation is temporary, borrowed, and ultimately insignificant. But your consciousness, the awareness that perceives, the witness that observes, is eternal, untouchable, and infinitely rich. When you focus on that inner observer, when you cultivate it, nurture it, and allow it to expand, everything else begins to transform naturally. Your relationships change not because you force others to change, but because your energy shifts. Your work changes not because circumstances change, but because you bring clarity creativity, and presence to it. Your suffering changes not because life becomes easier, but because your identification with suffering diminishes. The greatest misunderstanding humanity carries is that focusing on oneself is selfish. In truth, unconscious people are selfish. They are constantly demanding, comparing, competing, and consuming because they have no inner source of fulfillment. Conscious people, on the other hand, are generous, not because they try to be good, but because they are overflowing with awareness. Love, compassion, patience, and joy emerge naturally when the self is fully seen and fully known. You do not need to become better, more moral, or more disciplined. You need only to awaken to yourself. The awakening itself generates all virtues as byproducts. A flower does not try to smell sweet. It simply blooms. In the same way, when you focus on yourself, you bloom, and in that blooming, the entire world around you responds, not through effort, not through control, but as a natural echo of your inner transformation. You have been trained to believe that change requires effort, struggle, and discipline. Society tells you to fix yourself through willpower, to improve through moral obligation, to endure through pain and sacrifice. This is a misunderstanding. Effort without awareness is futile. Struggle without seeing is blind. Real change is not moral. It is existential. It begins with presence, with observation, with silence. In silence, the layers of pretense, fear, and habit begin to loosen. In observation, the mind reveals its patterns. In presence, the ego, with all its claims and defenses, gradually dissolves. You do not have to become somebody new. You only have to remember who you truly are. And remembering is not a task. It is a realization, a falling away of the false, a recognition of the infinite, luminous awareness that has always been there. When you focus on yourself, you begin to notice the space between thoughts, the gaps that were always there but never seen. At first, these gaps are fragile, fleeting, easily missed, but they are doors, portals to freedom. In these gaps, there is no past, no future, no anxiety, no ambition. There is only presence, only being, only life as it is, uncolored by the mind. The moment you touch this presence, the outer world loses its grip on you. Events no longer control your moods, circumstances no longer dictate your peace. You become the center from which life flows, rather than a puppet pulled by invisible strings. To change everything also means to take responsibility, not blame. Blame is reactive, fragmented, violent. Responsibility is conscious, whole, empowering. When you blame, you remain a victim of circumstance. When you take responsibility, you reclaim your power. You begin to see how you have participated unconsciously in the creation of your experiences. You begin to see how your thoughts, choices, attachments, and fears shape your reality. This seeing is not guilt. It is liberation. Because in liberation, you discover choice. You discover that every moment is a chance to respond from awareness rather than habit, to act from clarity rather than reaction, to live from freedom rather than fear. God does not demand that you become moral, disciplined, or righteous. God demands only awareness, only presence, only radical seeing of yourself as you are. In that seeing, all change arises naturally, effortlessly, silently. Your anger, your pride, your envy, your attachment, your fear, they begin to fall away on their own, not by force, not by effort. God says, focus on yourself, and this focus is not a task, it is a journey into the unknown. The unknown is not outside, it is within. You have spent your entire life looking outward toward achievements, approval, relationships, possessions, ideas, but all of these are shadows. reflections of what already exists within. The world you see is a mirror of your inner state. Every joy, every sorrow, every struggle, every desire arises because of your inner consciousness. To focus on yourself means to witness the mirror carefully, to look not at the reflection, but at the space behind them, the source from which all reflections emerge. When you turn inward, the first thing you notice is chaos. Thoughts arise incessantly, memories replay, fears surge, desires pull. This chaos has been ignored, suppressed, and disguised for decades. Society, culture, and even family have conditioned you to avoid it, to distract yourself, to escape into doing, achieving, chasing, or blaming. God's call to focus on yourself is a call to face this chaos without fear. Facing yourself is not comfortable. You will find habits that humiliate you, emotions that disturb you, desires that shame you, attachments that bind you. You will see how much of your life has been mechanical reactions without awareness, patterns without choice, fears inherited rather than experienced. At first, this seeing is painful. The ego resists, the mind rebels. You may feel lost, overwhelmed, or unworthy. This is natural. The ego thrives on identity, pride, and control. When you focus inward, the ego feels threatened. But the path is not to fight the ego, not to destroy it, not to resist it. The path is to observe it. Observation is the doorway. In observing, the ego loses its authority. It can no longer manipulate you. Its grip weakens, and slowly, without effort, the real self begins to emerge. Focusing on yourself means understanding that all change, all freedom, all growth begins within. External conditions cannot create liberation. A beautiful home, a successful career, loving relationships, or public recognition may bring temporary pleasure, but they cannot free you from fear, anxiety, or inner unrest. Liberation, transformation, and true happiness arise only when consciousness turns inward. You begin to notice the subtle patterns in your mind, how thoughts arise and die, how emotions flow and fade, how reactions repeat without awareness. This noticing is not interference, it is understanding. Understanding dissolves the old. Awareness transforms. A thought that is seen clearly loses its control over you. A fear that is watched without resistance cannot dominate. A desire observed without attachment ceases to bind. God asks you to focus on yourself, because only when you do you begin to take full responsibility for your life. Responsibility is different from blame. Blame is reactive. Responsibility is conscious. When you blame others, society, fate, or circumstances, you remain fragmented, scattered, dependent. When you take responsibility, you reclaim your center. You see how your choices, your reactions, your attachments, your fears, and your hopes have shaped your experiences. You begin to understand that life is not happening to you. Life is happening through you. This realization is liberating. It does not induce guilt. It induces power. For the first time, you feel that you are not a passive passenger in your life, but the conscious center from which life flows. Focusing on yourself also means returning to your body, your senses, your presence. You have lived most of your life in the mind, a world of abstractions, concepts, worries, and fantasies. The body, the senses, the breath, and the moment are constantly ignored. Yet these are the gateways to your true self. God's instruction to focus on yourself is a call to inhabit your body fully, to feel deeply, to breathe consciously, to live each moment completely. When you do this, the mind slows, the heart opens, and the self awakens. You discover an inner rhythm, a natural harmony that has always existed, but has been drowned by noise, distraction, and unconsciousness. To focus on yourself is also to embrace silence. Silence is not emptiness, it is fullness. Silence is the soil in which awareness grows. It is the space where thoughts cease to dominate, where desires lose urgency, where fears fade, and where the self reconnects with its source. In silence, you experience your being without labels, without judgments, without obligation. In silence, the inner observer becomes visible to itself. And in this seeing, transformation occurs naturally. Change does not need force, it needs attention. Change does not need effort, it needs awareness. Change does not need time, it needs presence. God's command to focus on yourself is radical because it goes against everything the world has taught you. The world tells you to seek outside, to compare, to compete, to achieve, to accumulate. God says, turn inward. Do not run. Do not seek. Do not compare. Be still. Be aware. Be conscious. This turning inward is revolutionary. It does not conform to social norms, expectations, or definitions of success. It leads to a freedom that is beyond approval or disapproval, beyond gain or loss, beyond pleasure or pain. It is a freedom rooted in the inner self, in the observer, in consciousness itself. As you focus on yourself, you begin to see how deeply interconnected you are with the world. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every action you take shapes your reality. The outer world is a reflection of the inner state. When you are chaotic inside, the world appears chaotic. When you are clear, the world becomes transparent. When you are peaceful, the world resonates with your peace. God asks you to focus on yourself because the universe responds only to the observer. Change the observer, and everything changes. This is the secret hidden in plain sight. Focusing on yourself also requires patience and compassion. You will stumble, fall, and repeat old patterns. The mind will rebel, the ego will resist, and old fears will resurface. Do not condemn yourself. Observation is patient, awareness is gentle. Every moment you return to yourself, every breath you take in presence, every thought you notice, is a step toward liberation. Progress is not measured by achievement but by attention. Every time you come back to your center, you grow. Every time you watch without judgment, you expand. Every time you feel without suppression, you awaken. Ultimately, focusing on yourself is about returning to the source, the unbroken, eternal, luminous consciousness that has always been within you. It is about realizing that all you seek outside, peace, love, freedom, joy, clarity, already exists within. You do not need to acquire, achieve, or perform. You only need to remember, awaken, and allow what is already present to shine. In this focus, transformation happens naturally. The world changes because you have changed. Life flows because you are present. Relationships deepen because you are aware. Joy arises because you are whole. Love blooms because you are free. And all of this unfolds effortlessly, silently, infinitely, without effort, without demand, without control, in perfect harmony.